we're ready to talk about firm behavior now. And I want to kind of preview everything with the end result and give you this graph to help you think about the relationship between the market and the individual firm. If you had intro with me, then you've seen graphs like this before. But if you haven't, that's okay. We'll go through everything. The difference kind of between what I do in intro and what I'm going to do here in intermediate is that in intro, I kind of give you all of these numbers, and in intermediate, we're really thinking more about where all the numbers on this graph come from. So what we have here on the left is a graph where we're describing market, that should be demand. And you can see we've used the big Q here to represent the quantity supplied and demanded in the market. And that big Q is going to be equal to the sum of all the individual quantities supplied by the individual firms. So here, the market aggregate supply or total supply in the market and aggregate demand, not in the macro sense, but in the market sense, like when we add up all the individual supply curves and we add up all the individual demand curves, we get market supply and market demand. Then together those set the price for the market for all firms, right? We have an equilibrium point here, which determines the market equilibrium price. And that is going to set this price for all firms in the market. Firms then, because they're price takers, they observe the market price and then make their individual profit maximizing choice. So this picture here on the right is a representative firm. So we have one firm here, little q for the individual firm's quantity. And the individual firm is going to observe the price and then make its short-run production decisions, of course, to maximize its profits. And this is analogous to that graph that we saw in the first video, right? Will produce as long as your price, your revenue for each additional unit is higher than your marginal cost. So the profit maximizing point graphically is here, where price is equal to marginal cost. And I just want to talk a little bit then about how we calculate profit in the context of this graph and how we think about the supply curve for the individual firm. So remember, supply is the relationship between price and the quantity produced. So I know, like, at this price, this is the optimal quantity. If the price were higher, I would come over to marginal cost to maximize profits, and this would be the optimal quantity. And you can start to see here that the marginal cost curve describes the supply, the relationship between the price and the quantity that the firm will produce. So your marginal cost curve is your individual firm supply curve, with one caveat, which is that the price has to be higher than average variable cost. So you may remember from intro that if the price is lower than your variable cost, right down here below your average variable cost curve, the firm's going to be losing money even in the short run. And so the firm will just shut down. They will say, I'm not going to open on Tuesday. I'm going to close at 6 p.m. because after that, demand is so low that I'm not earning enough to pay my operating costs, my variable costs, and the firm would choose to shut down. So the supply curve, if we were to look at the firm supply curve, let's just highlight this in orange here. Then the firm supply curve is equal to marginal cost as long as it is above this average variable cost curve. For prices below that average variable cost curve, the firm supply would be at 0. So here we have our supply curve for the individual firm equal to marginal cost. So let's now talk about how to calculate profit on this graph. Remember that profit is total revenue minus total cost. So if I were to write out my total revenue here, total revenue is price times quantity. And let's go ahead and just put some numbers on this graph to give us something to work with. So let's just suppose that our market price is 10 and that when we come down here to our average total cost curve, we get average total cost equal to 8, and that this quantity is 100. Okay, I just made those numbers up to give us something to work with. So you can see that total revenue is price times quantity, then that would be 10 times 100, or a revenue equal to $1,000. And that on the graph, that would be equal to this length here, right? That's the quantity, that's 100 units, times the height is that price of 10. And so that rectangle, that big rectangle, would represent total revenue. Total cost would be equal to, you know, all of your costs added up. But one way to think about that is to take your average total cost per unit, and multiply it by the number of units, the quantity, so that we get 8 times 100, or 800. And on the graph, that would be this distance here, right? That height of 8 and length of 100. So this is your total cost. The big green rectangle would be your total revenue. And then when I subtract, what I'm left with, right, is just this area where total revenue exceeds the area of total cost. That area is your profit. So one way to think about calculating profit is to use instead this price minus average total cost times quantity equation. That's a bit easier to calculate in the context of this graph. And we can see that the area of profit on the graph is equal to this rectangle, which is the distance between your price and your average total cost times the quantity. Okay, good. So now what we're going to do is go through each of these graphs, the individual firm graph and the market graph, and think about how firms make production choices in the short run and the long run, and where all of these numbers come from.